Hello, this is Samuel Slaughter, and this is the History and Stories of Inclusion at William Jewell. The question I asked, what are some of the untold stories of Black students and their history, and why are they often left untold? My immediate answer, I immediately found that a lot of stories of inclusivity, as I termed it, were left untouched. Many of them I had never heard of while attending William Jewell, and neither had my classmates. Despite this, there was not a lot of detail in a lot of the stories, with specifics often left out. There was a constant problem of people mentioning that the story was reported in local newspapers, but the archival of them was either not available, behind a paywall, or someone just never got back to me. My thesis stated as follows. Although Jewell regularly tries to flaunt their diversity and inclusion, there are many stories that are not being told or talked about liberty in its college, William Jewell, with their implications being noteworthy for a request for an acknowledgement and understanding of the past. Immediate background knowledge. Later in the process of writing my paper, I realized that I wanted to know what had led us to this point of our diversity rate and culture. This is when I sought out to answer this first sub-question. Was there any precursor that may have foreshadowed William Jewell in the time of the Civil Rights era? Mainly the Civil Rights era defined as sometime between the 1940s and 1960s. This was after I expanded my topic just past the history of Black students as I sought to learn more about their experiences in liberty as a whole as far back as the 1880s. It was not supposed to be a central point of my paper, but a notice of the history that we deal with in similarity to our Black student history in liberty and William Jewell, not just one or the other. So this is what happened. Before the Civil War, Clay County had 27% of their population as slaves, with 14 free blacks populating the county. In the election of 1860, not one person voted for Abraham Lincoln in the entirety of Clay County. During the Civil War, the Union lost the Battle of Liberty, totaling 126 casualties, making Jewell Hall a makeshift hospital. There is now a marker near Grand River Chapel honoring their bravery. There's also another marker in similarity, which is honoring men who defended Jewell from a rumored invasion 1 year later. Jewell is critiqued for moving these markers, along with removing some of the monuments that Jewell students built. They also removed the trenches from the Civil War, as many historians felt that there was no attempt to even preserve either. Both markers are still at Jewell at Grand River Chapel, but is out of the way of most Jewell students. Directly before the first black student was admitted, the Clay County Courthouse and City Hall refused to fly the American flag until the start of World War I. In 1889, the Missouri General Assembly passed legislation ordering separate schools for students of quote-unquote African descent. In 1890, the Missouri Supreme Court ruled that segregated schools were not against the 14th Amendment. This decision, interestingly, would be reversed 2 years before William Jewell ever admitted their first black student. Here's some more information. In 1900, Henry Darley was lynched in Liberty. He was one of the many that are recorded to have been lynched in Missouri. In 1904, a statue of a Confederate soldier was put up in Fairview and New Hope cemeteries in Liberty, where black people had been historically buried. The monument has a Confederate flag on it, and it was later vandalized by members of the 2020 Black Lives Matter movement. The story of William L. Blake. In 1948, Reverend William L. Blake applied to William Jewell College. Reverend Blake was denied admittance because of that reason, I will not say it, as reported on by several newspapers and magazines. He was the pastor of the Mount Zion Baptist Church, which was interestingly formed in 1843 in Liberty, and was known as a place where slaves, masters, and free blacks often shared a cup of communion in the old courthouse on the historic Liberty Town Square before they built a sanctuary to house their church. Not much is known about Reverend Blake after his denied admittance that I can find. The stories of Gladstone, Fairweather, and Augustine Okonkwo. In 1956 and 57, Gladstone, Fairweather, and Augustine Okonkwo became the first and second black students to attend William Jewell. Both performed on the 57 cross-country team, but not much more is known about them and their time at Jewell. Both are absent from all yearbooks in the years that they would have attended the college. Gladstone Fairweather in more detail. Gladstone Fairweather, otherwise known as Pastor Stoney, graduated from Jewell in 1960, receiving a bachelor's degree in biology. He went on to receive multiple master's degrees at different universities. He also went on to establish many churches in Jamaica, where he was originally from. He was also very involved with being a renowned pastor and esteemed family man until his death in 2014. Augustine Okonkwo. He was known as Gus by many. He earned multiple Bachelors of Science degrees while at Jewell in 1961, and eventually went on to get his doctorate and teach at Norfolk State University until his retirement in 2006. He was involved in his communities in 2016, was known for traveling around the world to see people of different backgrounds to wish them to do their best. The story of Pee Wee Summers. Pee Wee Summers became the third black student to attend Jewell, despite reports to the contrary that he was the first by many. His parents were never gone to any school past elementary. He played two sports, basketball and track. I also read that he participated in baseball, but I could not find multiple sources. He lettered in basketball and track all 4 years while at Jewell. He was the Athlete of the Year in 1965 and was inducted to the William Jewell Athletics Hall of Fame in 1995. He was also the classmate of Larry Hawley, who once recounted that Summers was discriminated against during a team trip as he was told to go to the kitchen to eat. Students and coaches refused, giving the money to Pee Wee and telling them to either take the money from him or get no money at all. I particularly brought this up because I thought it was an interesting first story of Jewell students and faculty seeing an opportunity to go against the status quo. After William Jewell College, Pee Wee Summers stayed in the community, reffing games initially. He later went on to ref some big games in the Big Eight. He did eventually pass away in 2014, but is still donating money to William Jewell through his will as of 2018 to 2019 donors. So after I found out our year, I sought to find out other colleges' years, because initially I thought that the William Jewell first date was pretty good, but then I found out that it wasn't. In 1823, the first black student was admitted in the United States. In 1877, Washington St. Louis University Law School admitted their first black student. In 1944, St. Louis University. 1948, UMKC. 1950, Missouri University. 1954, Missouri Western. And the only college that I could find that was behind Jewell in this regard was Northwestern State University. Our diversity rate. I just wanted to talk about it real quick in this paper. I did not focus a big portion of it. Until recently, Jewell continued to be behind in diversity as a college. In 2001, our diversity rate was 94-6. In 2010, we only improved it by 8 points, but in 2020, we improved it by 7 points in 1 year. So who is to blame for this lack of black students initially and the denial of Reverend Blake? The college as a whole is probably to blame, but I particularly think it was probably to do with our president at the time, Walter Pope Benz, who spent almost 20 years at the college, primarily in the time where we denied Blake and we admitted the first two black students that were not present in our yearbooks. He also popularly defined us as the Cardinals for our mascot with the phrase commonly said while he was president, William Jewell is a college of cardinals, with a pope as its president. Here's some more information about him. He grew up in the South, with much of his family having Confederate sentiments, as his grandfather was a Confederate general in the Civil War. In his autobiography, he calls black people that which was common at the time. However, he continually talks of them as farmhands and storytellers. Interestingly, the author of Jewell is Her Name, H.I. Hester, was Ben's VP the entire length of Ben's presidency, and he was also his seminary mate. There's no mention of him, Ben's, in any bad light, or any mention of black students in the book. So, race and ethics relations with Dr. Chastain. In 1965, William Jewell College started offering a race and ethnic relations class with Dr. Ed Chastain. The class was taught for almost 30 years until his retirement. In 1967, this class fasted with Chastain to better understand the effects of world hunger. Chastain himself believed that it was simply not enough to hear and read about the struggles that were going on in the world, because you had to go and experience them yourself. A story like this was the story of the Black Panthers coming a year later. According to Chastain, they were an intimidating lot whose visit was not a polite exchange, but instead an informative one. William Jewell students chewed on every piece of information they could, trying to know what made the Panthers tick. Eventually, the Black Panthers were happy to tell them, and eventually were actually sad to leave the hill, despite being passive at first. But these same Black Panthers visited another campus about 50 miles away from Jewell. Chastain recounts that the other campus was not as welcoming to the Panthers, which probably had to do with the campuses working differently, along with a varying set of other issues, and the violence quickly broke out. Chastain says he believes that the reason William Jewell didn't erupt in violence that day that the same Black Panthers came was that the William Jewell students wanted to learn and wanted it to go right, and the other college didn't. So in 1970, the Black Students Association, otherwise known as BSA, their chapter was formed at William Jewell, and their goal was to design and implement a myriad of activities and events that expose and celebrate our appreciation for heritage and foster vigorous and open campus-wide discussions. I mainly mention this because I feel as though it is interesting that it took 14 years for this to happen after our first black student was admitted at Jewell. So, talking about Chastain more. In 1988, his race and ethnic relations class formed the Hate Busters in response to David Duke winning a seat in the Louisiana legislature. The organization fights inequality in the greater Liberty area, which is about a 125-mile radius from William Jewell. So here's the conclusion to the main question. Despite their constant mention of diversity and inclusion among the administration and faculty, stories of importance are being ignored. In Liberty, Missouri, William Jewell stands very differently in 2020 than it once did in 1849. In the 1950s, you could almost rarely sense the amount of racism present in the town due to the treatment of black people, including not regarding their progress in a community where they were not regularly welcomed. If our history was right, many would not have claimed Pee Wee Summers as the first black student, but the two I mentioned before him. If our history was right, we'd see both Gladstone and Augustine in our Tatler yearbooks, along with any other mention of William Blake. If our history was right, we would honor the black men and women from Jewell and not run away from it. Jewell at some point seizes the moment of opportunity, and other points chooses hate over inclusivity and change. When we do seize the moment, we have to try to rapidly catch up to others. Implications of this history are being thrown away or not acknowledged, shows implications of needing to change. So all of that's great, but when I sought out to write this paper, and when I was thinking about an idea, I thought to myself, just saying all of this stuff that I just presented to you is not enough. I need to just provide simple solutions, not super detailed, but just solutions. So firstly, I said William Jewell should be renamed instead of bearing the name of a slaveholder who should not be honored simply because he provided the initial plot of land for our college. The college should firstly consider the name of Jewell, as many call it that already, and it gets rid of the reference of Dr. William Jewell. However, I think that there are better options. The college should consider renaming it for its faculty members, Virginia Rice and Cecilia Robinson, naming it Rice and Robinson College. Virginia Rice is a former William Jewell student, graduating in 1928 and later coming back to the university after receiving her master's degree. She was instrumental in creating the theater department, directing more than 150 productions while at William Jewell. She eventually retired in 1975. Cecilia Robinson was the first black faculty member in William Jewell's history and was an English professor from 1979 to 2013. While at Jewell, Robinson worked on behalf of various causes that championed racial diversity, including BSA and understanding in the Northland. She also served on the Clay County Historical Millennium Board and the Rebuilding Together Liberty Board. Changing the name would honor these two amazing Jewell women, along with evoking hope for the future of the college. College could also be renamed after the two students who I mentioned previously, Gladstone and Augustine, or F&O for their last names. They are often ignored, I would say, and that would be a move that I think would acknowledge them in the ultimate way. There is precedent for a name change at the college level, shown by Washington and Lee, and their faculty approving the drop of Lee from their name. He was a president of the college for many years, and in many ways I thought similar to Dr. Jewell in that he helped the institution go through tough times. Nonetheless, they chose to change their name. I think that the Cardinal mascot should be dropped as well, as it is from a time when the college refused to admit black students. Firstly, we should consider the name Jewells upon a full name change of the college, meaning any name but William Jewell or Jewell. This would be recognizing the original women who went to Jewell, often known as the 10 original Jewells. Secondly, the college should consider the name Generals to recognize those in the Jewell community who have fought, including many of our founders who fought in the Mexican-American War. Finally, the college should consider the name Crows, as they are the actual bird that flies around William Jewell's campus. They are majestic creatures who work best as a pack and attack those who challenge them. There is precedent for a mascot change even at the professional sports level. We can see this with the recently renamed Washington football team and the Cleveland baseball team. It is okay to look at our history and say that we were wrong for these names and that they should be changed. I also think that we should start teaching the information of this paper in greater detail. Although there are other core classes at Jewell about subjects such as ethics and all-encompassing history of this dark past at William Jewell is needed, and however it comes, it should not be an optional meeting once a month, but a required class or seminar. Each Jewell student should have to learn what happened at the college at which they attend and what William Jewell is doing to help it. Finally, my conclusion was in this general paper was that I felt Jewell has a history of their administration almost not accepting black students. But then on the other hand, there are great stories of students and faculty providing acceptance. Then how my research calls into question others' views on the subject. I think that a lot of people want to think that William Jewell is very accepting and very diverse from the outside, but I think that a lot of students have noticed that it's not, and I think that we are moving in the right direction with our diversity rate going up, but I think that there are still changes that should be made. Here are my sources that I used. Thank you.